and ended up having a sixth child. And then that was like the full family. It was the 6 children, her and the new stepdad. And all of the children took their adoptive father's last name. So Sophie, which this is interesting. I read that was like, people claim that was like a traumatizing, having to change from her father's name to a new man's name, which I never thought about, like changing a name as traumatizing. But I wonder, in a place like France, where I understand a name is very important. Like if you guys watch the episode of Unsolved Mysteries, the French one, where they were like, and then the family name was tarnished. Like I feel like we don't talk about that as much in the States as in some other places.
Yeah, but still your name is your identity. Like,
yeah,
it's, I don't know. Like I have a different last name than my nuclear family. Like growing up, because my mom remarried. So growing up, I was the only Sparks in my family.
Yeah, that's
my
how
younger siblings, my mom and my stepdad all have my stepdad's last name. But I don't know. I don't know. It's just your name is who you are.
Yeah. So they all changed their name. And Sophie, while she was growing up, so she's 10, now she's a teenager or whatever, she didn't get along with her mom well at all. And even after remarrying, or her mom remarrying, her mom began again having extramarital affairs. She like just couldn't stop herself. Except now she had Sophie tend to all the children, the house, lie for her, etc. So she'd be off doing these affairs, and she would have to Sophie would have to be like, oh, she's doing this. Like,
that's a lot of pressure for a little baby.
And she had to take care of all of her younger siblings because she was the oldest, and there were 5 of them. And one of them was like a baby. So that strained their relationship even more. So there's this thing in France, like the education system. When you're in high school, it isn't that you just graduate and then you get to go to college or you don't. In France, so I taught at a French middle school and 2 French high schools. And there are different types of like schools. So you have to take something called the baccalaureate, and they call it the bac in French, or in France. Baklava?
Baklava test?
I've taken that at an Indian restaurant. But so
baklava's Greek, but
is it?
Yeah.
They have it in Lebanese. Well, Lebanese isn't Indian, obviously, but maybe it's called something else.
I don't know. Anchorage always had this giant Greek festival where they'd raise money for the Greek Orthodox Church, and they had the best homemade baklava.
I know you can buy it in different restaurants, but I don't know where it came from.
School.
But anyways, so the BAC is essentially if you want to be something like an academic job, like a doctor, a lawyer, or something where you have to go to advanced schools for, you have to take this thing called the BAC and pass it. So one of my jobs was to train people in the English portion of the BAC so that they could pass their BAC.
So it's like not like a placement test, but
it's like an SAT kind of.
Yeah.
And you have all these different things, and you have to speak in English for 15 minutes. Like you have to be fluent.
Wow.
So I would train people to pass the BAC. Now, if you don't pass it, you can take it again, but you have to wait certain numbers of years between taking it.
Wow.
If you don't pass it, you can't go to college or university. You just can't.
So they don't have like because I guess you might not get, but they
don't even have a community college.
I was going to say, there's no other option. Wow.
And if you want to take the BAC, you have to decide that when you're like 12 or 13. You don't take it when you're 12 or 13. You take it when you're like 17 and up. But you have to decide when you finish collège, which is middle school, you have to decide if you're going to take the BAC route or if you're going to take the trade route, which is like mechanics, baking, trade schools, essentially. And so
honestly, even 17, 18, when people are graduating high school here, I'm like, that is so young to like decide what you want to do when you grow up. What if you change your mind? It works for them.
Well, people do. And then they can go to these special schools, kind of like Phoenix schools, where it's like, I don't want to say for bad kids because they're not bad, but kids who didn't perform well or have behavioral issues. So I taught at one of these schools in France where it was kids who decided they did want to take the BAC, but they had done very poor academically. Okay. It's for kids who have like not special needs, but like special academic needs, I guess.
Yeah.
So anyway, she had decided to take the baccalaureate route, but she kept failing her BAC. So she never actually got it. So she couldn't actually go to university. And then in that case, you haven't even learned a trade. So you're like, then you become like a cashier or like something that you don't have to have a degree or certification for, which is fine. But that's not what she wanted for herself. So she was devastated. She didn't pass the BAC, and she blamed it on her mom for having to take care of all the kids and do all the housework while her mom was out gallivanting. Okay. It was quite sad for her.
Yeah. Wow.
So she didn't pass her BAC.
I'm glad you did this case and not me, because I'd be like, oh, this lady lived in France and then like killed her coworker.
Well, that's why I saw this. I was like, oh, I actually know a little bit about it. I'm not claiming to be an expert, but I know a little bit.
We chose the right cases for ourselves.
So when Sophie was 20, she moved to southern France to Montpellier, and there she ultimately meets the man that she will marry. So Sophie's been described by her coworkers as manipulative, petty, and these are things that her in-laws quickly noticed about her. Apparently, Sophie loved to steal like little things like from them, and this tore their relationship apart because she would steal like pocket change and stuff. And you're like, Sophie, like we know it's you, and she'd be like, oh, it's not me. And they're like, yo,
it's like when someone lies about something small, right? When someone's like,
you're like, stop.
Oh yeah, I have a doctor's appointment. I don't know, when someone lies and they're like really at the grocery store, and you're like, why lie? Like, I wouldn't care if you were at the store, you know, like,
it's just a
like,
petty
why?
lie. Like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So this tore her relationship apart with her in-laws, but despite this, she and her husband got married, stayed together. They had their first baby in 1988. They had a girl. Then they had their second baby in 1994. So this case is actually like pretty recent.
And my brother was born in 94.
Yeah. So their children are adults now, and at the time of the case, they were too. So, oh no, the struggle. So this family had never had a ton of money because she didn't pass the BOC. And I don't know if her husband did, but it seemed like he had jobs like janitor and things. So like it seems like he didn't take the BOC either. They struggled financially, but they were finally in a better place with that. But she got a job at the University of Montpellier in like their medical facility. I don't know if she was like secretary work. I don't know what the work was, but it was like some kind of entry level work. But she got greedy and she took that too far. So first she was spending like way more than they were making. And it was making her husband like super upset because they were in debt. But things looked up a little bit when she got her husband a job there. So he was the janitor there. She worked in like the office or whatever. Sophie's first run-in with the law happens now. So the details are unclear. But essentially she embezzles more than $35,000 35,000 euros, which is like $40,000 or more, like way more. Nothing said, but that it must have been work.
Or maybe from different people or something.
Yeah, so she embezzled a ton of money, which was great because she spent it all right away. But then she got caught right away and didn't have it anymore. So she got caught. She gets charged for theft and forgery, and then she's also sentenced, but she just gets house arrest with like an electronic monitor on her ankle, and she also has to pay the 35,000 euros back. But she's already spent it. So her and her husband are like, oh, fuck, we don't have the money. So they come together, her and her husband, and go, what are we going to do about this? So she and her family having financial problems. Sophie's upset and she like calls one of her friends to, complain about it. She's like, this sucks. Like, I don't know what we're going to do. And her friend is like, hey, have you thought about like being a sex worker? And Sophie's like, no, but I will do that. And so her husband kind of agreed and she started doing sex work temporarily. Her marriage was already on the rocks and she was like super lonely because she wasn't allowed to leave the house because she was in house arrest. But they found some loophole and rented a studio apartment that she was allowed to go to, like because it was an apartment and it was a house. I don't know. Anyway, so she was allowed to go to it. So she did all of her work, her sex work at the studio apartment in a neighboring town. And they also like installed cameras so she'd be safe. Like they took all these precautions and like that was how they made the money back. So she did that for a year. She brought her Johns to that apartment, made some money, and then stopped doing sex work. It's now 2011 and she's 47 years old. She finally decides she's going to get her life together. She's done like stealing things and like embezzling and sex work. Like she's like, I want like a job that, is like a 9-to-5 that is in my interest area. So she goes back to school and she passes her BOC finally because you can take it whenever.
Oh, okay.
So now she can go to university. So she does that and she gets a degree. So things are finally looking up for Sophie again for the second time. Upon getting her degree, she is recruited for a company called Agifif. And Agifif helps like handicapped persons integrate into society. It's like a government-based funding program for people with handicaps. And she's placed in Toulouse, which is the city I lived in. Oh, and what's weird is she lived there a couple years after I did. I'm like, oh, that's weird. It's the same time. Okay, so she and her husband moved there, but her children are already grown at this point, so I don't know if they moved from Montpellier or not. Montpellier to Toulouse is like only an hour away, or maybe 2.
Yeah.
So Sophie,
it's like Buckeye to Phoenix.
Yeah, like maybe they live there. I don't know. So Sophie's working at Agifif. Financially, things are looking up, but there's one problem. She cannot stand her new colleague, Maryline Planche. And Marlene has been working with Agifif for about a year longer than Sophie. So she was kind of her senior. So their positions were essentially the same. They had the same boss, but Marlene automatically had seniority strictly because she'd been there a year longer and understood.
That's how it works, Sophie.
That's how jobs work. Marlene was described as shy, docile, maybe, but very, very, very dedicated to her work with Aj Afif, often bringing the paperwork home with her to get more done, to help more individuals who needed to find jobs, who had handicaps. And everyone at the company loved Marlene because she was kind and she got shit done, essentially. People were like, oh, I can count on her for anything. She's the go-to girl. She was motivated and passionate, and her colleagues were grateful for her all the time. And she was also only a year or two younger than Sophie, so they're about the same age. This annoyed Sophie, though, for whatever reason, to no end. She resented Marlene. She resented how much everybody appreciated Marlene and how much everyone liked Marlene. According to Sophie, Sophie believed that she, quote, embarrassed the king and queen, referring to Marlene and their boss. She'd call them the king and queen, and she's like, I'm not worthy. Kind of seemed to play victim a little bit. Now, I'm not there, so I'm not going to speculate, but she seemed to just have this strange authoritative, authority complex. And she also implied that she was kind of the butt of some joke. She just felt like she wasn't as smart as they were. Something bothered her about the whole situation. So finally, after working there for hardly a year, Sophie was deeply upset. She was jealous. She was exhausted. And she still could not stand Marlene, which everyone who
find
worked
another
there
job.
It was, and it's funny because it wasn't even a secret that she hated Marlene. And Marlene didn't quite understand either. But Marlene didn't like her because I'm assuming because Sophie was
I don't generally like people who hate me.
Yeah, so they did not like each other.
If you hate me, I'm going to pretend I hated you first.
Who hated who first?
I hated you first.
I hated you before it was cool. Oh,
yeah.
Sad. So sad. In May of 2016, so not long ago at all, Sophie...
I hated a lot of people in 2016.
Especially May. So in May of 2016, Sophie stole a bunch of meal ticket, free lunch coupon things at their work. And Sophie later said that she did this so they would fire her because she hated her job so much. Some of her colleagues said that she did this because it's Sophie and Sophie's petty and steals things. So, she still stands to this day. She's like, no, I was trying to get fired. But people are like, bitch, you were just stealing free lunch. Stop. Her bosses in this month were like, hey, so we need to talk to you about, the lunch coupons. And so they set this meeting up. They didn't fire her right away. They're like, hey, let's talk. So Sophie was like, yeah, I'd love to do this meeting right now, but I have a toothache, so I must leave immediately. And she left. This was on...
I'm going to use that excuse.
I have a toothache and I have to leave
Sorry,
right
boss.
now.
I have a toothache.
I can't talk to you about my performance today.
He'll be like, you're working from home. I'm like, yeah, but my tooth hurts, so bye.
So I'm hanging up now. See you
my
later.
tooth hurts. You want to talk to you? Going through a tunnel, bye.
We can't talk because it's 2:30. But the day that she does this and leaves work early is May 12th, 2016, which is the day that Maryline Planche goes missing. Sophie tells Marlene that she'd like to talk to her about their working relationship. She maybe implied that she wanted to make amends or express concerns to Marlene. Marlene agreed and was like, yeah, let's do it. We can meet at my place near downtown Toulouse. Let's meet tonight at I don't know what time, but it was the evening. So Sophie went to meet Marlene, and we only know the details based on what Sophie says and then what the autopsy later shows.
Always meet them in public. No, that sounds victim blaming, and I don't mean to do that.
What you mean. But also they're coworkers, so I would be like, you know what? She wants to make amends.
Yeah, by no means is it her fault. You'd assume that person's not a fucking murderer, but
yeah, because I would always meet someone in public. But if it's my coworker who kind of hates me, I'd be like, yeah,
I'm so fucking paranoid. I'll meet everyone in public.
You're like, we're meeting at the dog park with big dogs.
Yeah,
right now. So Sophie did meet Marlene at her house. I'm gonna go over the facts of what happened first, that we know these are facts, they can't be denied, and then share Sophie's reasoning behind the facts.
Okay,
because she's like, well, there's a perfectly clear reason why I
is there bitch?
She said that the conversation started out cordial, but essentially she attacked Marlene pretty quickly after she got there. So that evening, Marlene's neighbor, before I get into what happened, hears Marlene shout for help. She sees Marlene's apartment's door fling open, and she sees Marlene attempt to flee and then get pulled back into the apartment by her hair by a female body. Nobody calls the police. Caitlin just threw a pen down. She looks so done. She's getting up and leaving.
Call the fucking police.
Call the police, please. When Marlene's back in the apartment. Sophie hits Marlene over the head with a bottle of wine and bludgeons her.
Jesus.
Marlene falls to the ground. Sophie kicks her a few times on her body. And she says Marlene was